a date which will live in infamy.
We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets, we shall fight in the hills, we shall never surrender.
November 11th, 1918, the Great War had concluded with an armistice between the Allied and Axis powers. The ceasefire went into effect on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, with the official peace being signed on June 28, 1919. The Treaty of Versailles forced harsh terms on Germany, essentially putting all the blame for the war on the nation, being just as much as a victim as the rest. The world was relieved to have the most destructive period in human history come to an end and bring about a new age of prosperity. The euphoria lasted for almost a decade as we saw the future free from any global conflict taking shape again. At least that's what we thought. At the end of World War I, Europe was in a state of recovery from the destruction that had taken place prior. After the signing of the Treaty of Versailles, many of the Allied nations believed the worst was over. However, for Germany, the gears to a dark period would begin to turn. After the abdication of Kaiser Wilhelm II, power was handed to a government led by the leader of the left-wing Social Democratic Party, Friedrich Ebert. This party formed the Weimar Republic, a government put in place to see to the aftermath of World War I for Germany. They needed to accept the terms of the peace deal, which forced Germany to surrender colonies in Africa, Asia, and the Pacific, cede territory to other nations like France and Poland, reduce the size of its military, pay war reparations to the Allied countries, and accept guilt for the war. Additionally, the German army was to be limited to 100,000 men. Conscription was forbidden. The treaty restricted the Navy to vessels under 10,000 tons, with a ban on the acquisition or maintenance of a submarine fleet. Germany was forbidden to maintain an air force. Inflation would begin to soar as Germany would be in a perpetual state of freefall on the world stage. Meanwhile, the rest of the world was dealing with their own tribulations. The mighty Russian Empire had now endured the Bolshevik Revolution and transformed into the Soviet Union, overthrowing its monarchy and executing the royal family of Tsar Nicholas II. The birthplace of communism now had a state fully controlled by the political ideology. In the Pacific, Japan transformed into an industrial powerhouse, emerging as a key player on the world stage, but was also excluded from the peace talks of World War I. Japan resented this and adopted imperial ideology and policies that would begin to take shape in the coming years. Back in the West, many great powers enjoyed a time of peace and prosperity, especially the United States. This would be known as the Roaring Twenties. The 20s saw a surging economy created in an era of mass consumerism. Jazz began to take shape in the music industry, creating a new style of dance and celebrations for the masses. The Harlem Renaissance redefined arts and culture. However, prohibition laws and gangsters began to take shape in the decade, fueling a new black market. This gave rise to the growing mafia during the Prohibition era. Citizens were enjoying the spoils of war and everything that came with it during the crackdown on the Prohibition movement. America had a bustling economy both in the private sector and in the underground crime world, with infamous Chicago gangster Al Capone spearheading the anti-prohibition movement. But all good things must come to an end, as the world would wake up from this high during the stock market crash of 1929. The global depression hit Germany hard. Citizens would carry wheelbarrows full of cash to buy portions of bread. The German economy was ruined, and Germans were outraged by the reparations set on them. Western powers like the United Kingdom and the United States attempted to provide what aid they could to jumpstart the German economy. But this would only help so much as the damage was too great by this point. Germany was struggling and the world felt it. Germany was a prime source of industrial manufacturing globally, but took a hard hit after World War I. German citizens couldn't find work, struggled to eat, and were flat out angry at the conditions that had been forced on them. One of the many Germans that boasted anger and resentment was none other than Adolf Hitler. Hitler served in World War I as a soldier. He was a messenger and a runner, and was wounded multiple times during his service. His experiences in the war deeply influenced his political beliefs and thirst for power to transform Germany into the great nation he dreamed it could be. Prior to World War I, Hitler tried his hand at art, but was twice rejected from the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts. He supported himself by taking on more of a freelance approach to art, selling to vendors and postal services, many of whom were Jewish, ironically enough. However, the First World War left him bitter and angry like many Germans. Whilst Germany was holding on by a thread to stay afloat, Hitler began to take political action. During the 1920s, Hitler formed the National Socialist German Workers' Party, also known as the Nazis. They sought to take over political power in Germany through rallies, intimidation, and even violence. Through trials and arrests, the Nazi Party began to bring about a momentum that would change Germany's future forever. Hitler blamed the Weimar Republic's weakness on the influence of Germany's Jewish and communist minorities, who he claimed were trying to take over the country. There are only two possibilities, he told a Munich audience in 1922, either victory of the Aryan or annihilation of the Aryan and the victory of the Jew. The young Hitler saw history as a process of racial struggle, with the strongest race, the Aryan race, ultimately prevailing by force of arms. Mankind has grown great in eternal war, Hitler wrote. It would decay in eternal peace. By 1932, the Nazis were the largest political party in the Reichstag. In January of the following year, with no other leader able to command sufficient support to govern, President Paul von Hindenburg appointed Hitler Chancellor of Germany. Shortly thereafter, a fire broke out in the Reichstag building in Berlin, and authorities arrested a young Dutch communist who confessed to starting it. Hitler used this episode to convince President Hindenburg to declare an emergency decree suspending many civil liberties throughout Germany, including freedom of the press, freedom of expression, and the right to hold public assemblies. The police were authorized to detain citizens without cause, and the authority usually exercised by regional governments became subject to control by Hitler's national regime. Almost immediately, Hitler began dismantling Germany's democratic institutions and imprisoning or murdering his chief opponents. When Hindenburg died the following year, Hitler took the titles of Führer, Chancellor, and Commander-in-Chief of the army. He expanded the army tremendously, reintroduced conscription, and began developing a new air force, all violations of the Treaty of Versailles. Hitler wanted to test the waters and see just how far he could push the Allies before they would intervene. Hitler was building Germany back up from the inside out, reviving industries and getting the German economy back on its feet. The citizens saw Hitler as their savior. They believed he could pave the way for a brighter German future. After Hindenburg's death, there was nothing left in Hitler's path to stop him from seizing total control over Germany in 1934. Germany now had a new face with the downfall of the Weimar Republic and the rise of the Third Reich.
Madness possessed the German nation.
Nun als Dauererscheinung für uns, unser Oberster, wird die Einführung der allgemeinen immer wieder herniedersteigen.
The stage was set, and Hitler began to turn his gaze outside of Germany. Looking to expand Germany in the heart of Central Europe. Wanting to recapture lost territory from Poland and beyond. He decided to first try his hand in looking at his prospects in Austria and Czechoslovakia in the south. Hitler had already broken the Treaty of Versailles by building up Germany's military, yet the Allies do nothing. Hitler sees this as a perfect opportunity to test the waters even further. Hitler would begin planning with his officials to devise a strategy to expand Germany without risking another world war. However, Hitler was not the only one making moves in the late 30s. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Japan has begun the warpath against the Republic of China. A new emperor, known as Hirohito, came to power in Japan in 1926 and would end up leading the Japanese into one of the most destructive periods in human history. Since the beginning of the Meiji Restoration in the late 19th century, Japan had rapidly modernized their country, industry, and military. Along with the desire to be as technologically advanced as the rest of the world, Japanese nationalists wanted their country to also become a global empire. The first steps to imperial expansion were when Japan fought China in the First Sino-Japanese War in 1894 to 1895. During this conflict, Japan invaded Korea and took control of Taiwan. Japan's new military power was unstoppable against the older-style Chinese military. Then, in 1904, Japan went to war against Russia in the Russo-Japanese War. Again, Japan's forces defeated their enemies and took control of parts of the region called Manchuria. A ferocious Japanese invasion took place across the northern Chinese seaboard, bombing and capturing multiple cities and territories. However, nothing would compare to the infamous Rape of Nanking event. The most horrific event of the Japanese invasion took place during the capture of the Chinese city of Nanking. From December 1937 to January 1938, Japanese soldiers brutally killed somewhere between 200,000 to 300,000 Chinese civilians. Japanese cultural ideology had taught their soldiers that the Chinese were inferior to the Japanese and that such killings were justified. However, news of these atrocities shocked the rest of the world, and most other countries supported the Chinese against the invaders. Japanese soldiers engaged in the most heinous crimes during the capture of the city. Citizens were killed through methods of decapitation, torture, and firing squads. The Chinese women were brutally raped. From young girls to elderly women were forced to partake in gang rapes while their loved ones were forced to watch. Babies were used as target practice, being thrown into the air and shot at like it was sport for the soldiers. Evil had been unleashed and put on full display during the fall of Nanking, and the world would soon hear of these atrocities to be left in utter shock and awe. Back in Europe, Hitler had taken over Germany by storm and was the new face of German prosperity and glory. The Nazis now had the populist support and governing power to establish a totalitarian dictatorship in Germany. Hitler proceeded with his plan to expand Germany and annexed Austria in 1938. The majority of Austrian people welcomed the Germans into the country, believing the annexation would heal Austria's stagnant economy. Hitler did not stop there. He quickly began moving into Czech territory, occupying the Sudetenland. France, Italy, and Great Britain in 1938 signed the Munich Agreement, which acquiesced to German demands that Sudetenland be given to Germany. The hope was this would be enough for Hitler.
This morning, I had another talk with the German Chancellor, Herr Hitler. And here is the paper which bears his name upon it as well as mine. We regard the agreement signed last night and the Anglo-German naval agreement as symbolic of the desire of our two peoples never to go to war with one another again.
But this would not satisfy Hitler's hunger to expand. He would go on to annex the rest of Czechoslovakia in March 1939. Germany by this time had now fully rebuilt its military capability, but was still not ready for an all-out war. Hitler decided to once more test the Allies' response and looked to carve out real estate in Poland for the German people. This would be the point of no return for the world. The wheels of war would now begin to accelerate in 1939. After signing a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union, Hitler and Stalin would jointly invade Poland on two fronts simultaneously, dividing the conquered territory between themselves. The Polish never stood a chance, being severely outdated in technology and lacking in manpower. The Nazis and Soviets crushed the Polish in less than a month. Poland faced impossible odds as the country was swallowed up by the two great powers. The Polish army was forced to retreat or surrender. Nazi units rapidly moved in from the west and used a pincer tactic to corner and trap Poland across all fronts, resorting to the blitzkrieg strategy to quickly overwhelm the opponent and force them into submission. With the Polish conquered, Hitler now grew in fear of what the Allies might do. An official declaration of war had been sent to Germany from France and Britain. Hitler now knew this was going to be a fight if he wanted to continue his campaign of world domination. Everyone's worst fears had come to fruition as another world war was underway. Meanwhile, below Germany's underbelly, the fascist state of Italy, ruled by Benito Mussolini, had been making their own moves in the background. Italy invaded and annexed Albania months prior, while also establishing their presence in the Greek islands off the coast of Anatolia. Italy also adopted an aggressive colonial policy to strengthen its grip on African colonies, particularly in Ethiopia, to counter French and British colonies. The world was now in a state of total war. France and Britain declared war on Germany shortly after Hitler's invasion of Poland, prompting Hitler and Mussolini to declare war on the Allies. World War II had now officially begun.